Phillips. It's time now for my esteemed guests to unburden themselves and tell me what they need to talk about. And Superwoman campaigner Kellie-Jay has chosen the Gender Recognition Act. But first of all, here's some facts. Under the Gender Recognition Act 2004, adults can legally change their gender if they meet certain criteria. That is, they need 2 medical reports showing gender dysphoria diagnosis. They must live full-time in their acquired gender for at least 2 years, and they must provide proof, such as copies of their passport and driving licence. Campaigners for reform of the GRA say the process is arduous and stressful for those involved and favour a system of self-identification for those who believe themselves to be of the opposite sex. This has been backed recently by the Women and Equalities Committee. Now, Kellie-Jay, where do you stand on the GRA?
Let's get rid of it. Let's completely repeal it. I mean, even in your introduction, you talk about people who believe they are the opposite sex, and yes, it's called the Gender Recognition Act. It's not called the Sex Recognition Act. I think it's just nonsensical. I don't think it's workable. I think in a proper liberal and tolerant society, people would be able to dress however they wanted, and we wouldn't need the state to recognise as something that they aren't.
I mean, does this come down to the fact that if, for instance, a man who transitioned to become female had the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, had made all the efforts, gone through surgical procedures, medical interventions to change their gender because they wanted to fully live as a woman, would you be comfortable with that person using female spaces?
No. No, I really wouldn't. I think it comes down to, it's so subjective. Trans activists might talk about passing. I personally think that is something that for some people, some men might pass as women, and for others they won't. It won't make women any more comfortable. A female-only space is no longer a female-only space if there's somebody that's a man in that space or somebody who's male in that space. So it's completely unworkable. And also what's happened from the inception of the 2004 GRA, the rights of women have just persistently been eroded. So before the GRA, would we have had men in women's prisons? I don't think we would. I don't think that would be something where we would be right now. I think the logical conclusion of the police calling rapists women and recording that as crimes, as Girl Guides, not being able to keep men out of the Girl Guides movement. I think all of those things are completely because in 2004 we created a legal fiction.
Well, let's talk now about how people want to update the GRA and actually move it to a system of gender self-ID where all you have to do is say, I believe I am a person of the opposite sex, and then you have all of the access to that particular sex's spaces and whatever it may be, privileges. Why do you think that's so perilous?
I think it's perilous for a number of reasons. I think it's ultimately perilous for just a safety and comfort reason for women. I think if predatory males want to more easily access women's spaces and sort of go under the radar and not be asked questions, then I think self-ID is a perfect way to do it. But for me, it's much broader than that. It's not just about the predatory men who want to be in women's spaces. It's about any man who wants to be in women's spaces. I think that ultimately makes every single one of them someone who is not a friend to women.
I mean, we can welcome Katie Jumworth into the studio as if by magic. There you are.
As if by magic. Deliberately put on a shorter chair for some reason.
We always have you down the line. It's amazing to have you in the studio with me. Now, Kellie-Jay wants to scrap the whole GRA. What's your position on that? Should it be updated? Should it be binned?
I do believe, actually, that it's problematic for some of the reasons that Kelly mentioned, but also for other reasons. It wasn't so much a legal fiction when it was brought in. It was the very fact that it was a legal necessity because it was required by the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights and European Convention, because what had happened is prior to that is people were being married and one person was transitioning, which then created the legal fiction of a same-sex marriage before we had equal marriage. So that was one of the reasons it came in. It was mainly for the purposes of stopping the legal fiction of same-sex marriage. And it was around that issue because, and as you rightly say, it's a Gender Recognition Act that enables you to change not your gender, but the sex on your birth certificate, which is the legal fiction. And I've got no problem saying that. A trans woman is born male. Their birth certificate other than for the purpose of marriage, which is about being an adult, their birth certificate doesn't, I don't see any reason why it shouldn't still say the one you were born as, even if you are now marrying as something different. And now that we have equal marriage, to some extent, it's redundant. And also, we've got these catch-22s, is that no one's allowed to or meant to ask for your gender recognition certificate. It's classed as a breach of data protection. The only two people that can ask for it is a registrar, effectively, or they don't because they just get your birth certificate. So the GRA enables you to get a new birth certificate, then you never need it. The only other time they recognise a gender recognition certificate is in prison. And then they still cock it up. Am I allowed to say cock it up on live?
Sorry,
I've said it now.
Probably can't. Apologies for that colourful language.
The trans person said cock. Oh dear, done it again.
And then we apologise a second time. Now,
but you know what I mean. That's the issue.
Before you drop another clanger, when it comes to gender self-ID, are you worried actually that the trans community might be infiltrated by opportunists, essentially? Perverts, peeping toms, predators.
I think any community has always had them.
I identify as a woman to access intimate spaces that are single-sex spaces.
Well, I was just chatting to someone else, and we've always had trans people in the community. We've always had trans people accessing some spaces. And when they were a minority of people, an absolute minority, most people turned a blind eye. And also, so long as, again, they were behaving, then what you monitored, what you policed was bad behaviour, not someone's presentation or anything else like that. So there's always been trans people in the community. And the irony is, if we're talking about updating the GRA for self-ID purposes, the difficulty is at the moment, in order to be trans, you have to self-ID for 2 years before you can even enter the system. So we already have self-ID, but it's a completely different process to get this gender recognition certificate. And that's one of those things where it doesn't actually help most people. 99% of people don't go down the path of asking for a gender recognition certificate. I don't think it's anything to do with the cost of it. The fact that the government's going to knock it down from 150 quid to a fiver, that's not going to save the day. If making it easier in terms of the hoops you have to jump through, I still think those hoops should be there, personally.
Yeah, I mean,
because it's a rare group of people within the trans community who even request a GRC.
If people have jumped through the hoops as they stand now, and someone like Katie, John, or whoever...
Actually, I haven't got one, even though I've gone all the way in every other sense.
But if a man has fully transitioned, I mean, surely then you can identify this person has just done what they need to do for themselves and isn't a threat, and women shouldn't be threatened by someone like that.
I personally don't believe that transition into something else is feasible or possible. I think it's a nonsense to say that you can have a few surgeries and you've totally changed your biological sex, which again comes back to the word gender, comes back to the fact that we talk often about gender as if there's some ethereal or soul-like thing in our bodies that isn't connected to our biology, and I don't think that's true. So as far as I'm concerned, it really is about the autonomy and the sanctity of women's spaces and not having any men in them under any circumstances.
And why do you think it is that there's such a vitriolic campaign against you, especially when it comes to voicing these opinions?
Well, because I'm always right. Why do I think? I think for some men it's very difficult. I mean, we talked about the word no. I think for some men it's very difficult for women to say the word no and mean it, and be unapologetic about it. And I refuse to be polite and nice about basically preserving women's boundaries and rights.
Yeah, I mean, Katie, briefly, because we've got to keep a tight format on this show, have you been under attack as well for actually standing up for women?
Yeah. I get piled on, I get cancelled, I get blocked by both sides in this whole so-called debate thing. And I think one of the biggest issues for me as well is that we both stereotype each other, you know, angry woman, gender critical, the T word, or any other of the bits of the language. And then the trans person is also stereotyped as a trans rights activist, only having this monolithical kind of opinion, only being part of a fixed ideology and a movement. I think we have to recognise that everyone's a human being and everyone's an individual in all of this. And to tar everyone with the same brush is awkward. I mean, and I understand completely why women's spaces are there, why they are created, and why. It's not that all men are rapists, it's that women need a space apart from men.
It's a bit like leaving your front door open.
Yeah.
It's going to be the burglar who takes the opportunity.
But there are many of those spaces that have been accessed for years by some people, as opposed to all people.
Yeah.
And I don't believe personally, and I don't speak on behalf of any other trans person, I will be shot down in flames for not towing a party line as well. But equally, I don't choose to access a woman's space unless I've been invited in or welcomed.
We appreciate that. KJ, thank you so much. Love how we've got two KJs. Thank you both for bringing this debate to the public, and always a contentious one indeed. Well, we asked the government for their position on the Gender Recognition Act. A spokesperson said the government believes the current provisions in the Gender Recognition Act are effective and allow for those who wish to legally change their gender to do so. We listened to those who responded to the GRA consultation and are taking steps to modernise the way that individuals can apply for a gender recognition certificate as a result, including reducing the cost and moving the process online. Well, you've been emailing us throughout the show today, and another of our main subjects was collector culture. Tina says, it's not just men that share around nude images. There are many examples of women doing it as well. As a woman, I feel that we can actually get away with it more compared to men. You have a point there. Dave says, if you don't post it, then it can't be shared. People need to be really careful who they share things with. Good advice. Ken says, I've never heard of collector culture before, and I'm shocked that this is going on. Me too, Ken. Some or most men need to change because this is terrible. Thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate that. We like solidarity with our menfolk when it comes to these big issues. Well, we've been asking over the last few days what women want. It's an enigma that has befuddled men since the Garden of Eden. So here on We Need to Talk About, we're going to try and find out. Are wolf whistles offensive? Is holding the door...
Bad table manners, especially noisy eaters. So not necessarily a male or a female thing, but just if somebody's making a noise when they eat, I really do want to commit an act of violence.
Chewing with an open mouth, that sort of thing.
Chewing with or even just noise at all, even just a slight hint of a noise. I think there's a name for it, but I just call it a massive irritant.
Of all the things out there, that's the one you go for.
That's the one that probably, if I'm on a train and somebody gets out some food and it's noisy, that is, I'm afraid, that is my massive driving me insane thing.
I agree. No one enjoys it, but I think you could have got a bit more strong with any more.
Well, look, I don't like men in women's spaces. I don't like the fact that we have to use a word called misgender, which I find it just a nonsensical word. I hate the fact that schools have started sending out emails with MX instead of Mr, Mrs or Miss.
Schools getting involved in this is just sick, isn't it?
The neutralising of all our language, the fact that we are obscuring who men are in everyday parlance. Like, I could go on, but a pet peeve is the eating.
Now, you're known as a woman who, very much stands up for womankind, and so therefore I think you could be a good arbiter when it comes to what women think is acceptable or not. So where do you stand on stuff like wolf whistles? I'm not bothered by them. I don't care. Do you think it's grim?
Well, I think it depends on who you are, where you are, what age you are. So when I was 13 and a group of men wolf whistled and I'm walking on my own, that's pretty gross.
That's gross.
If it happened now, it would be unusual. So wolf whistling, I don't think that's the biggest threat to women, but I've been catcalled when I've been taking my very young children to school, like a few years ago, and blokes have just shouted at me from a van. So I think that's something I definitely think has to go.
And chivalry? Are you up for chivalry getting out of the dustbin of history and seats to be given to women on trains and doors held open? Or do you think that's long gone and actually we can fend for ourselves and it's insulting?
Well, I don't know if equality or the seeking of liberation of women included please don't ever open a door for us again. We're capable of opening a door. My husband takes out the bins, for sure. So, no, I think chivalry is kind of just a male politeness, right? Yeah, bring it back.
I'm with you all the way. Wolf whistle, you're right, to young kids, it's grim. Kellie-Jay, I've loved having you on today. Honestly, total hero of mine. Keep up the good work. You're a strong woman, and we love strong women We Need to Talk About. Well, that's about it for now, but join me again for We Need to Talk About